Jason, welcome to the show. So happy to have you here on Product Growth Stories. We're going to dive into your background in B2B SaaS and really talk about File Cloud. You're serving as the Chief Product Officer, and I see you also have a background at Kemp Technologies. So you're bringing in a wealth of experience into product strategy and development. So I'm really excited to hear about your journey. And just to start us off, what led you to File Cloud and how has your role evolved?
See, my background started in enterprise IT, primarily in the finance industry. So I worked for the New York Stock Exchange, Deutsche Bank, a bunch of other financial institutions, and really enjoyed that. I got to cut my teeth on working in a business where technology isn't, or at least at that time, wasn't the core of the business. It was incredibly integral. I worked at an investment firm called AllianceBernstein. There, it was a little bit of a difference. This was at the juncture where you had organizations starting to see that, look, technology isn't just a necessary evil. It's not just a keep the lights on type function, but we can actually use this to differentiate. The CTO that I worked under really made that a priority for the whole enterprise IT organization. And with that kind of sparked in me the interest to want to take what I had on the side of being a consumer of technology for the business to work in ecosystems where technology was the business. That's what eventually then led me to Kemp Technologies. We were in the application delivery, load balancing, network security space. We're really very critical to our customers' ecosystem.
That's more like core infrastructure was it also in the finance space?
That was certainly one of the spaces that we operated in. It's plumbing, like you said. You don't have people jumping up and down about load balancers and web application firewalls, but you can't deliver your application to meet your requirements without it. So load balancers, core to customer infrastructure. It's not necessarily the focus. You're not typically going to have an IT person where load balancers is what they do, but absolutely key for infrastructure. We were VC backed, essentially did a recap with a private equity company as well, grew the company further, got a chance to get involved a little bit more on the M&A and integration side, which I really enjoyed. And as I've went forward, any role I've been in, I've always sought to make that a part of what I'm doing as well. We bought a couple companies and we eventually sold Kemp Technologies to a large publicly traded firm called Progress Software. Progress has infrastructure and technologies across a wide range of kind of the digital experience life cycle of organizations. And I worked with them for about a year and change.
And what was the kind of timing leading up to the acquisition? Were you aiming for an acquisition that year, and did you already structure who you're aiming to be acquired by, or was it more it just came about because of market conditions?
I'd say it's a little bit in the middle. As you mentioned, market conditions. Our timeline was probably a little bit longer on what we were expecting for that next exit. But given market conditions, we said, you know what? Let's take a look at what the possibilities are right now. We had got some inbound, unsolicited interest through one of our banking contacts initially. We explored it. While that initial deal didn't go through, we said, you know what? It looks like the timing might be right. And then we went into a bit more of a formal process, got several bids, and we saw that there was a nice match, not only at a technology and portfolio perspective, but also from a cultural perspective and a shared vision perspective with Progress. Yeah.
When you sell, you also want it to keep living. It's not only the check at the end.
Exactly. There's people, there's technology, there's blood, sweat, and tears, and we saw a good opportunity. So went over to Progress, and I stayed there for a year and change, helped with the integration, built a joint around $105 million portfolio between the products that we had, some of the other products that they already had within the portfolio. Now, in the meantime, the investors that we had in Kemp and some of our senior leadership team had come across File Cloud, right? And so when that exit happened, they went ahead and came into File Cloud. And then after I finished that integration work, I came and joined as Chief Product Officer, and just this year took on the role of Chief Product and Technical Officer as well. So spanning the whole kind of gambit of the environment.
And what sets FileCloud apart from its competitors?
Yeah, it's a very good question because there are a lot of ways to share and access files and documents and the like. I'd say there's a couple things. One is the flexibility that we give customers on how they're going to deploy. The majority of products within the enterprise file sharing and sync are strictly delivered online as a SaaS hosted product where the vendor is hosting it on your behalf. Now, we do provide that offering because there's plenty of customers where that's what they want. But there still is a segment of customers that need to have full control over the location of the data and the infrastructure. Exactly. On-prem, of their own Azure, AWS, VPC that they might manage. And so giving customers that control is a real differentiator of vendors, that flexibility.
And is it typically also in that case like finance, enterprise finance that's looking at this, or are there other sectors where that's really meeting a need?
It spans the gambit, but it is going to typically be customers that maybe have regulations that they have to comply with, right? Finance, of course, legal, anyone dealing with PII. Those are typically the ones that you're going to see. But on the other hand, we do find some customers that's not in any of those spaces. They're used to using traditional file shares that they've got hosted in their data centers or wherever it is. We want something that gives us more control, allows us to make sure we know where the data is, who has access to what, but we want something that's somewhat similar to what we've been using. And so you will still find some customers that don't necessarily have any of those strong regulations, but they still prefer to deploy either in a physically on-prem deployment or inside of their own public cloud ecosystem that they manage.
For some reason, I don't know why it's coming to mind, but like every accountant I've ever had uses the same file sharing thing. It's like some Swiss software provider. You probably even know them for their like secure files where you upload your documents and whatnot. But it seems that certain niches have very specific file sharing. And I see you have you're integrating e-signatures into the portfolio.
We acquired a company called Seniority recently. I guess I was about a year ago or so, we acquired Seniority, a Canadian-based e-signature company. And that was really just triggered by filling a gap that we were seeing our customers was looking for. Most of our larger competitors did start to adopt that. The majority of them through acquisition. We looked at it and we said, hey, is this something that we want to build, partner, or buy? We looked at building. We did even do a simple POC to prove out the potential of it. To turn something into a real product, there's a lot more work. And so we did proactively start looking at opportunities on the market, came across Seniority, great team. Again, key to investment, a good cult hit. And we've been working on the integration at the organizational level and at the product level over the last 9 months or so.
And I'm curious, what are you finding is the best way to get net new customers right now for these different segments?
Inbound marketing, definitely at the core of our engine. So make it easy for customers to touch the product, to do self-service trials, having the right content that's going to map to what people are searching for. That is one of our differentiators, right? We have a very talented CRO and marketing and sales team that he's built, really understanding how to leverage search to our advantage is that team's core competency.
You've built the right kind of content that's powering inbound. People are looking for specific lead magnets, tools, documents. You're using that to direct them to try the product and then follow up from there.
Exactly. That's one of the areas at an operational level where we've also started to leverage AI to help with assisting us, the kind of space that AI tooling is optimal for. So we've significantly shortened the time that it takes us to some of that content produced and then to experiment and iterate with it, right? So we have a handful of writers. We've been encouraging and getting them to leverage AI tooling to help with rapidly getting the type of content that we need produced, get that refined, get the technical experts to review it. And that I would say is it's really key. There's some limited outbound activities. Of course, we also are leverage trade shows and joint webinars and things like that. They have their place from a branding perspective, but for net new customer generation, inbound SEO. So there is another track, that's word of mouth, I would say as well. And
Yeah.
so we've had cases, let's say in government agencies, where we have one agency or one government ministry, depending on which part of the world you're in. They're leveraging our product, then share content intra-agency or intra-ministry, and the recipient says, "Hey, what is this? We actually have a requirement for something very similar." We're still using USB sticks and emailing files to ourselves, but we're supposed to be doing this too. What is this? And that's been something that's been very useful as well, because that's ultimately what it is. This is giving your end users the ease of use of a Dropbox or a Google Drive or what have you, but it's in a sanctioned way where the CIO has full control. And so word of mouth certainly has been another track that's helped with generating that new customer.
I'm curious, does discovery work differently when you are serving enterprise clients? Most of my experience, either I've been working in enterprise or serving mid-market. I have less experience just personally with discovery in enterprise. How does that work with really understanding and getting solid feedback from your end user and your buyer, which probably are not the same?
They're not always the same, depending on how the organization is set up. I think the main difference is that an enterprise customer often already have a better idea of what they need. That's typically on the larger opportunities where you're educating a customer or helping why this is what they need to solve this specific problem. You're fast tracking, getting into the details. Does your product do exactly these things that I need? Now, that is where the education comes into play, because sometimes the customer is trying to solve the problem in a way that's not as efficient as it could be, or doesn't really make sense from our perspective. And so there is this steering that happens to say, hey, have you considered doing it X or doing it Y, as opposed to this preconceived thing you've done? And you've reached that just because you're basing it on what you've done in the past, or you're basing it on some other competitor that you've spoken with. I think that's the core difference I see.
So by the time you're having the conversation, by the time they want to even talk to you, there's several steps down the line and they already know what problem they're trying to solve. And you're saying there's often ways where you might be able to reframe the way in which they could solve that problem.
And access is going to vary. And I've seen in the companies we work for, is probably not the CIO directly running the trial. It's someone in the team. But we then will work with those organizations to make additional contacts. And we typically try to work them from both directions. Whoever is our initial technical sponsor will come in there. We try to get a couple levels up as well. We then have our heads of sales who will work from the relationship perspective. Myself, others in the leadership team will also spend time personally with our most strategic opportunities. Just did a bit of a kind of road show in the West Coast of the States recently for that. And with that, you seek to build those relationships so that you do have those direct connections, both parts.
Demonstrate that you care.
You got to demonstrate. There's a few customers that have my direct phone number, right? So you have to do that.
I understand that one. This has been a great conversation, Jason. I'm curious, if we look at the rest of 2025, what are you most excited about for File Cloud's future?
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things ahead for us for this year. Starting with the first one, it's our work that we're accelerating with service providers, right? So there are service providers, some that just offer services and some that may have some product within their portfolio as well, where they themselves want to add file sharing and sync capabilities to their stack themselves. Which is what we did with e-signature. They said, what's involved in actually building this? What's the timeline it takes? And they said, you know what? We can actually take a vendor who's already done this and embed this into our offering. And so we have several of those already set up. We have one that's even doing more of a white label type offer as part of their own storage stack. And so over the last 9 to 12 months or so, we've been seeing enough opportunities come up in this space that it's clear it's not a coincidence, but there's an actual market opportunity that exists there. So we're now moving from opportunistic to now focusing on how do we accelerate that further
With partnerships. Thank you so much, Jason.
Okay.